This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. Today we are going to be reviewing Star Trek Discovery Episode 504, Face the Strange. But we're going to start with news, and we do have some news, that's for sure. So I'm sure if you are out there in the Star Trek world, you heard the biggest news, which is Strange New Worlds has been renewed for a new season, and they announced at the same time, oddly, that Lower Decks will end with Season 5, which is sad.
It is. I'm not surprised by either announcement, though.
Well, you've been predicting both for a while.
I don't take any pleasure in it. It's sad to see Lower Decks coming to an end. I do think 5 seasons is a good run, especially in the new era of streaming. And Strange New World has still more to go, so it makes sense that it's getting a 4th season. By the way, Lower Decks is confirmed for the fall, and Strange New World Season 3, which is currently in production, was reconfirmed for next year.
And even though Lower Decks will be ending, it's not a situation like Prodigy. All the episodes will remain on Paramount Plus. You're not going to blink and look up and all the episodes are gone.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different situation. You know, it is still being canceled, technically, because it's not being renewed.
Right. And I'm bummed about it because I would have been happy to have that show go on for many seasons.
So would I, and I like it when they tell people when they renew something it's their last season, which they didn't do for either Discovery or Lower Decks, because they didn't know when they got their renewals, their 5th season renewals, those would be the last. The network didn't know. They just decided later.
Right.
Because there's less money.
Yeah, well, there's a whole shift in everything right now, so it's not a very stable time for television. I've seen a lot of fan reactions and people already starting petitions and trying to figure out, you know, should we do a flying banner? Should we do this? Should we do that? I don't know that those things would be successful in this case, but I would also say timing is important, and now isn't great timing.
I just don't see that happening because it's not being removed. They're not shopping it around like they were before.
Yeah.
It's a much different situation. Let's say, just for shits and giggles, that Netflix was interested in paying for another season. But that would also mean that they would want the other 5 seasons.
Of course.
So then Paramount would have to remove it from Paramount, which I don't see them wanting to do unless Netflix wanted to pay some huge premium, which I kind of doubt they would do.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
I think there's been some of the cast, and I think Mike, you know, they're flattered by this, you know, and they said, sure, you know, they haven't shut down the idea.
Well, no, and they wouldn't, you know, they would have no reason to shut it down.
And nor do I, you know, look, fan the way you want to fan.
And fans have accomplished a great deal when it comes to Star Trek, starting with the original series.
Absolutely.
So even though like my cynical entertainment industry heart says, yeah, that's not going to happen, my Star Trek optimist heart says, go for it. I'll sign. What do you need?
As a side note, Mike McMahon just, it was just announced in Variety that he's doing another TV show. He's also doing, you know, Solar Opposites for Hulu. So now he has 2 other shows. So
he's busy. You know, so Alex and Mike put out a statement together. Alex Kurtzman and Mike McMahon. And there was an interesting statement in that said, we remain hopeful that even beyond season 5, Mariner, Boimler, Tendi Rutherford, and the whole Cerritos crew will live on with new adventures. And what I think, I mean, they can be talking about comic books and books and all
which is a
things,
given.
Right. But who knows? Maybe we'll get a streaming movie. Why not?
Sure. That's entirely possible. And, you know, the character, we could get another crossover. I don't think it's the last we've seen of these characters.
Right.
I am excited about another season of Strange New Worlds. I still think that show hasn't met its full potential yet.
Yeah, I would agree. And it must be, I also think it's nice for them that while they're filming, they got that good news. I do think it was strange to make that a dual announcement. I think it made it very awkward. Like, you have the stars of Strange New Worlds who are excited and they want to share these headlines about how their show's been renewed, and then realize the same headline is saying Lower Decks is not coming back. Like, it was a very awkward, it was awkward for them. They want to celebrate the other people. And they're all part of the same Star Trek family.
I know why they're doing it, which is, it's a good news, bad news situation. They didn't want to just have a standalone announcement that is pure bad news. So they decided to mix it up. I mean,
it was a little odd. I would have staggered those a little bit. Well, for those who love Lower Decks, they should pick up season 4 on Blu-ray and DVD because it just came out.
Matt has a great review on the site. One of the good things about this season is half the episodes have a commentary, and those commentaries are a lot of fun.
Oh, cool.
So there's a kind of related story. There was an interview with Alex Kurtzman that came out actually before the Lower Decks news came out, but it's kind of related. He was talking about Discovery getting 5 seasons. He said, well, look, that's a miracle. People tend to tune out after 2 seasons in the streaming era. He said, not Star Trek, just in general. It's just hard for shows to get any traction after a couple seasons. And there's been, famously Netflix almost never renews anything past 3 seasons.
Yeah, it's very rare. And we're also, to be fair, in an era where the time between seasons is very long.
Yeah.
And it is hard to retain audiences given that. Like when you go, our next season is a year and a half from now. Oh, I don't remember what happened last season. So one of the things Alex said that has gotten conversation flying fast and furious is that he said he quoted a Trek writer from an earlier Trek era saying, man, there's a bunch of filler episodes in there. We're just trying to get 22 a season, because he was talking about the short seasons that they have now. And so he said they want to have fewer episodes a season because with fewer episodes a season, they want to make sure that every story counts. And what's interesting is that expression, filler episodes. So one, as we've discovered, even just in our conversations between the two of us, we define filler in different ways. Different fans define it in different ways. And then a lot of fans love the filler episodes and they say, I want a 26 episode season because those filler episodes can be surprising and fun. So already people are raging about it.
I mean, one person's filler isn't a filler episode. I've talked to Star Trek writers who've talked about how they would just have to crank out these scripts, and sometimes something was heading down the assembly line and they couldn't stop it. They knew it sucked. They just had to crank out 26 episodes a year, and that's just the way things worked back in those days.
Right. They would go back into the pile of ones that they decided not to do and be like, okay, which one of these can we do? Because we have 16 more episodes.
But you still end up with these gems every once in a while, mid-season. Sure, that they might have thought of as a filler, but turned into a gem. That is less likely, although one could argue, especially with Strange New Worlds, that, so this gets into what's a filler, is the costume episode a filler episode?
Right. Like I would consider that a filler episode.
But there is more pressure on them now with every episode to make it count, which was his point. It is apples and oranges because the episodes now, they spend a lot more. They take a lot longer to shoot. It almost takes as long to shoot 10 episodes as it used to take 20 episodes to shoot. They couldn't do 26 episodes in a year because there would be no hiatuses. They would just be constantly working. I
mean, I'm sure those writers on the old shows would say, yeah, we were constantly working. And now we have the opposite problem where you get on a show and you only get a few weeks of work out of it. It's challenging both ways in the industry.
It's not just Star Trek. I mean, the latest season of Loki had 6 episodes.
Right.
Your NCISs will have 22 episodes.
I was going to say Law and Order's probably still doing dozens and dozens.
All of the various DC shows on the CW, they got into the 20-somethings, right?
Yes. Yeah. I watched The Flash, Supergirl. Those all had long seasons.
One could say, well, why don't they just go back to that and start writing cheaper, faster, shoot them in a week episodes? But that's just kind of nobody does that on streaming.
I mean, I think the expectations for Star Trek are that it has to be cinematic. And that is going to take a long time in post and a long time to build the sets that you need and, film it and all of that. I mean, it's the interesting question for me is filler. Like, how would you, Tony, define filler episode?
Well, I think it would have like something with no major canon, no major connection to any other episodes, no major guest stars, most likely a bottle episode, no big idea kind of thing. Data's Day is a good example of a filler episode that's great.
Right.
But the Alan Moraine episode, I mean, is terrible. Now it's funny.
I love that episode.
Oh, come on. It's terrible.
No, I do. I actually really love it.
Okay, fine. But but it is one of those things where it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it, perhaps. But then everyone might have their own definition.
Right.
Like I saw some people saying Drumhead is a filler episode. I'm like, that's not a filler episode.
That's not a filler episode. And I saw someone say like someone brought up the costume episode of Strange New Worlds. I mean, I would say like Rascals is a filler episode of TNG. And that's one that sat around and nobody wanted to do it. And then they finally just kind of pulled it from the pile. And I really enjoy that episode. It's not an important episode. Weirdly, because it was TNG, there's no resonance in terms of like what it felt like to be a kid again. Once the episode's over, it's like it never happened, which was how that show worked anyway. But it was very fun.
I mean, is Masks probably Sub Rosa? Sometimes these things, get a life of their own later because they're so silly, they become beloved.
Right. Like Sub Rosa.
Perhaps filler is also the ones that end up being forgettable, where someone says an episode and you go, what was that one?
Right.
Who was in that one? And you don't even remember it because it doesn't have ghost sex or stupid masks.
Or lizard babies.
Yeah, it's just random, so random forehead alien, moral quandary of the week, move on. And that's that.
Right.
There are plenty of those.
I mean, I feel like you could go through the shows, look at lists of episodes, and get a bunch of Trek fans together and say which ones are the fillers, and you're going to get different answers.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an update on Strange New Worlds. Last week they finished the 7th episode, so now they're on to 8 of 10 because they don't do fillers; they just do 10 very important episodes now. But there was some fun behind the scenes videos posted by and she seemed to be having a lot of fun on
Oh my
set.
God, did she ever? That was great. I love those. I'm always so happy when a writer or a designer or a director is like, I love Star Trek. I'm so excited to be here. This is so awesome. I'm like, I want those people making shows.
There was also an interview from BBC Scotland with Martin Quinn, who plays Scotty, the new Scotty.
And he's Scottish.
Yeah, he's 100% genuine. And that was kind of the point of the article. He's from Paisley, Scotland, and he said Scotty's been rebranded. Now he's from Paisley. I believe the city of Linlithgow, Scotland, has some kind of unofficial claim to Scotty. So I'm not sure if that's, real or not. But nonetheless, he said that he's worked with the writers, like where he would adjust things to make them more Scottish.
Yeah, I remember hearing, I think it was Armin on Delta Flyers talking about how Colin Meaney would sometimes say, like, can we tone down that fake Irish thing and do some, like, he'd be like, nobody would say that. Or that's, let's not do a leprechaun or whatever it was.
The thing is, like, he's genuinely Scottish, so.
Well, he said he said he has to enunciate because sometimes they can't understand him.
Right. It's the real deal.
Yeah.
So we've got a movie news. Listeners, last week we got this news after we had recorded, so I did a little insert. But we certainly didn't have a chance to talk about it with Laurie.
Although you did predict what I would say.
So do you want to recap what's going on quickly?
Well, they basically said the Star Trek Origin movie, which is not the sequel to the Kelvin movies, but the other one we've been talking about, has been officially confirmed and put on its slate of movies. So this is like we don't have any details, but it's the first like official confirmation that it is going to happen. And that's kind of all we know.
I mean, we know the directors, we know the writers. They basically just confirmed all the things. It is technically called Untitled Star Trek Origin Movie on their release slate. It doesn't have a specific date. It's on their 2025-2026 slate, so probably 2026. But they announced this with like a dozen other things. But I noticed there was a lot more coverage of this line item from their list of things they're doing. This was one of the few things where it just got a mention, and yet a lot of the media jumped on it because it's kind of a big deal.
Right. Well, there's a big fandom out there. I mean, it still raises the question, do we need an origin movie again? But let's see if it's real, because they're saying it's real, but let's see if it happens, and I won't judge until there's something to judge.
What I understand it and the thinking to be is that they feel like they need to rekindle interest in Star Trek again in a new generation of young moviegoers who don't have a lot of association with it but are familiar with the brand. So the origin story is a way to do that. Now, the thing that none of us can figure out yet is, what does that really mean? I mean, when did the Star Trek franchise get bit by the proverbial radioactive spider, right? You know, what is that spider, as it were?
Right. What do they, and when they say origin, what do they mean? Like, you know, we almost had an argument about it the first time it came up, just because we were trying to understand each other's view. Like, I call myself Captain Literal because I'm very literal. But when they said a franchise origin story, then I'm like, right, so this is before anything we've ever seen, or is it a Kelvin origin? So, like, I don't know.
Well, I think it's before Kelvin, and you know, we'll learn more. There's plenty of time.
Yes.
The important news is that, as I've been saying forever, Paramount wants to get back into the Star Trek movie business, and they're trying.
Right.
You know, it's back on the list. It was on the list, then it was off the list. Now it's back on the list.
There you go.
So there's something else that we reported on, which, you know, we're not even sure is news. You know, we don't know what to make of it.
I do want to give a shout out to the person who sent it to me to share with us, which his name's Aaron Page, who tipped us off to go watch this segment of The View, because Zoe Saldana was on. And then there was this very strange moment that we still, having watched the clip many times, have no idea what to make of. Like, we just don't know. But basically, so, you know, one of the hosts said, do you know anything about the next Star Trek movie? You know, are you guys going to make another one? And so he said the usual thing she always says, which is, you know, I know what you know. No one's called me. I hear they have a writer now. There's another stab at the script. And then things got weird. So Whoopi Goldberg was asked, was it Zoe who asked her? Are you excited? Or was it someone else?
Zoe said, are you excited? Whoopi joked, oh, I'm a little excited. Then Joy Behar jumped in and said, don't tip your hand yet. And Whoopi was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Except she didn't use fuck because it's TV.
And it's The View.
And she said, don't tip your hand. This is Joy to Whoopi. Don't tip your hand yet. Don't tell them you got the job yet. And then Zoe freaked out and she's like, on Star Trek? Oh, that's so, you know, that's great, you know. And then Whoopi went into full, like, there is no other work I have. I'm just trying to go home. So she definitely appeared like she didn't know what Joy was talking about. Of course, she is an Oscar-winning actress. So,
yes, she is.
You know.
And she already deals with a lot of stuff on that show.
Yeah. But so if there's something that she's signed up for that she's not supposed to talk about it, she did a good job of not talking about it.
But what she didn't say was, what are you talking about? I'm not doing anything for Star Trek.
It was a non-denial denial. But
we were going through the list of things that it could be, right? So one, there's a movie she's going to be in it, which doesn't seem super likely. But
if there were, it would be the Origin movie, because it's the only one that's potentially casting this year. The Origin movie would have a new cast, but they're going to put someone in it. They're going to cameo someone.
And she lives a long time, so it would make a lot of sense.
Right. I mean, they had Nimoy in the 2009 movie. They had Shatner, and you're going to put someone in it.
So that's one option. Another option is that she has filmed something for one of the shows.
Or is going to. And because Joy doesn't know her Paramount Plus from her Paramount Pictures. So, it's just all Star Trek to her.
Right. All those hosts, whenever they ask about it, you're like, you don't know what it is, do you?
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, there's like a 15% chance she's in the origin movie. There's a 5% chance she's done something on one of the new TV shows. There's a 10% chance she was talking about the thing that she recorded, the recap for the Ready Room, which was out that same day. But
right. She could have said, I got to do some Star Trek thing. And then they misunderstood.
Yeah.
Or she could have done that Star Trek thing because she actually will turn up in Discovery at some point. There are so many different possibilities. And also another equally possible option is nothing.
Yeah, I would say there's like a 67.5% chance that it's nothing. Maybe more, maybe an 85% chance, really. And I was over
4.9.
Yeah. But it was like, the first time I'm like, this has got to be nothing. And then I watched it a couple times. I'm like, it feels like there's something here, maybe, It's like, I just wanted to know, what the hell are you talking? I had the same reaction as Whoopi. I'm like, what are you talking about, Joy? But it was worth sharing, and we shared it. So there you go. You guys decide.
I was going to say, come to the site. We have the clip. Watch it and tell us what you think.
As a complete side note, remember when Quentin Tarantino was, they had that movie going through the system and Paramount was really excited about it. But then he decided he didn't want to direct it because it was going to be his 10th movie and he's only supposed to do 10 movies.
Which he made up, by the way.
Yeah, it was his own rule.
Do 10 movies. Yeah,
it's not like
just do 11.
Yeah, but for whatever reason, he decided I'm only going to do 10, and then he eventually decided I'm going to do this other thing he was writing called The Movie Critic, and then this week it was just announced he's not going to do that. So I'm just saying, Star Trek's still out there, Quentin. Make it your 10th.
Also just do 11. Turn it up to 11 like Spinal.
Do 11. Yeah, exactly. I still want to see R-rated Quentin Tarantino crazy Trek. Definitely don't want it to be canon, or or it's canon. I don't want it to be in the Prime universe. Like, it's your own thing. It's like, but look at like a movie like Joker is such an amazing movie. Doesn't tie into the rest of the stuff, but it's amazing, and I'm looking forward to the sequel. So there's room for crazy side projects within a franchise.
No, I mean, I would be totally torn about that. I think he's so, I loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and was surprised by how much I loved that movie. So, but his sensibility generally is not mine, even though I think he's brilliant. So it's a little iffy for me. Like, I'm like, maybe I don't want him playing with my characters, but I would love to read that script.
If it's the only Star Trek movie they release in like a 5-year period, no. But if they're back in the business of Star Trek movies and they start doing what Marvel and DC do, where and Star Wars is going to do again, which is release multiple movies in different time frames, then put it in the mix.
But it can't be solo if they're trying to make people understand the Star Trek franchise, that you can't have
this
isolated thing with nothing else coming out.
This cannot be the next Star Trek movie. It has to be, get a couple more Star Trek movies in theaters, get people used to it again, and then do this crazy side thing. Yeah,
there you go.
The last bit of news is an update on something we talked about in November. A model that used to sit on Gene Roddenberry's desk, the first model used for the USS Enterprise for the cage and what they used for the opening credits, went missing in 1977, and then something showed up on eBay last year, and people like, is this it? The thing that went missing? And Roddenberry was going to look into it, and that was the last we heard of it. So Heritage Auctions helped kind of broker, authenticate, and facilitate a deal where now it's back in the hands of Roddenberry, and it has been authenticated by like Doug Drexler and Mike Akuda and all the all the
Darren
gods of Star
Dochterman,
Trek.
Mike and Denise. Yeah.
And everyone's happy.
I think the guy got paid something nice.
I assume, I don't know,
I think Rod said something like that, like, that he appreciated it. And so.
Yeah. But I think the important thing is it's been retrieved, and it's not in bad shape. They're going to restore it, I guess. It's 47 years old, and the cells are a little droopy.
And they're also going to do, like Rod said, something about putting it somewhere where fans will be able to see it. They'll do something with it.
Yeah.
He definitely has been really great about making sure that there's stuff for fans, legacy stuff for fans to look at and experience and do.
So a little good news update. Let's talk Discovery before we get into the review. Just want to point people to the site. Last week we ran some audio from Laurie's discussion with Wilson Cruz. There's a full article up mostly about last week's episode. And then we're doing the same for this week's episode, talking to Sonequa Martin Green. We're going to roll some of that audio during our review, but there'll be more for that interview, and that'll probably go up on the site on Friday, I guess. But let's review.
Yeah, let's do it. Face the Strange.
It's time to get strange.
Written by Sean Cochran, directed by Lee Rose. This has been my favorite episode so far of the 4.
This is the most Star Trek episode of all 4, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like they took something that's been done before on Star Trek, but put their own spin on it, which is great. It's almost a trope. Like, we're going to go back and visit our past experience. Like Voyager did a whole episode like this, but they did it in their own way, and it worked, and it was fun. And the crazy part is that they all keep saying, we didn't know it was the final season. And it's not like I don't believe them, but this really felt like an episode you would do in your final season because they take a real trip back.
And forward.
Yeah.
Or possible forward, we'll get into. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, it's a bottle show. There's no location shooting. There is a guest star, but it's basically, this is kind of a cost-saving episode, and yet it's the best one so far.
Yeah.
And, well, I guess there was a little bit of, that probably wasn't location. The scene with Mullen Locke at the beginning was probably shot in the volume, now that I think about it. But I agree. Certainly you get elements of Shattered. That's the Voyager episode, right?
Yes.
And a little All Good Things, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there was some, they did drop some time travel Easter egg nuggets, the Krenim were,
yes,
and the temporal Cold War, but they didn't, overdo it on that kind of stuff.
I think this season they are achieving something that I think a lot of the new shows have struggled with, which is just hitting such a nice balance of bringing in the past and canon without crawling up their own butts about it, without overdoing it, so that they're relying on that. For everybody's squee of recognition to make up for something. I think they're doing it very well. And the other thing that really helped this episode, I thought Sonequa Martin Green just knocked it out of the park. She was so good.
Yeah, this is a Michael episode, but it's also a Stamets episode, finally, because for the last 3 episodes, his character really has felt kind of pointless.
Mm-hmm.
They gave him something to do. Anthony Rapp really got into it, and we got to kind of remind ourselves how different he is in the season 5 than he was back in seasons 1 and they visited almost every season in this episode. Now that I think about it, so
yes,
he's been on quite an arc, which he notes himself.
Right, he notes how surly he used to be. I love the word surly. That was a nice touch.
They're continuing this theme of connectedness. So the big lesson, because it's Discovery, every episode has a lesson, like a sitcom, and everyone remembers, everyone learns their lesson at the end, was that it's good to have this connection with each other. And Raynor has to learn that lesson the hard way. It almost feels like this is in episode 1 where they're like, okay, we know about the mystery box thing, so we're going to deal with that. This episode seems to be addressing one of the other complaints about the show, which is it's too much about emotions and how we feel about each other. So they're like, well, but that is what the show's all about. That's one of our assets. And we're going to show you why, because they use that as a strength.
I felt that 100%. Very, very strongly. Yes, it was there for sure. And it was teaching, and it was through teaching Rayner. Because he's the one who said, you guys are all too close, you're too familiar, you're too loosey-goosey and you're too mushy and all that stuff. But he didn't phrase it like that. And he's the one who had to learn. And it's taken him 2 episodes now to learn that, but he's learning it. He got it this time. And he understood how to use it by the end. Like, he really got it.
And they did it without any crying or hugging. But there were very sweet moments throughout. And a lot of humor. This is the lighter season, and they're having a little fun with it. Now, I mean, I'm not sure I'd call this a critique, but the season is the quest season, and we've already seen this every episode. We get a clue and another clue and another clue, and there really was almost no progression on that. We learned nothing new about the progenitors or about the quest. This was almost a side quest, or literally they got paralyzed by the bad guys for an episode.
But we know the bad guys got one of the pieces.
No, we don't. We know that the bad guys caught up with them.
No, but they were buying something from that guy that they killed.
That was the spider. Did you miss the thing where it said 12 hours earlier at the beginning?
Yes, I missed the thing where it said 12 hours earlier.
So think about the end of the last episode. Maul puts the thing on Adira's sleeve.
Yep.
15 hours before Maul put the spider thing on their sleeve, they bought the thing from this guy. And this is another interesting case of how evil are Maul and Locke. So they just straight up killed this guy, but he was clearly a bad dude.
Right. Well, they said that he had done bad things in the past, too. Like she said, there's poison in it, the kind that used to sell to the Emerald Chain to use on people like me.
Right, because we learned she was in an Emerald Chain prison, and yeah, so...
They were super callous, like it was almost played as a joke. They're like making out and the guy's grabbing Locke's leg, and it was almost played for laughs.
The bigger thing, I think, going on there, and we've seen elements of this, is Locke just seems to be motivated by, let's have fun, let's make money. She seems more vengeful and more obsessed with the mission.
Yes.
You could sense that he kind of, like he says, I feel the walls closing in. I almost feel like at some point in the season, they're going to have an issue where he's going to say, look, I want out because it's too much.
Right.
And she's not going to want out. Yeah,
there was definitely a tiny bit of character building in there in terms of what their deal is.
Anyway, getting back, the episode, basically they were getting behind the Discovery people and they were using the spider to both track and catch up. So, they didn't get the clue from Janal, so they used the spider to find out where Janal sent them. And then once they got there, the spider essentially trapped the ship. So Maul and Locke could both show up at the location and presumably they found something.
Right.
Because their ship is gone. And so they are now ahead. So they may have clue number. So the Discovery has 2 pieces of the map of the 5. And I guess we're led to believe that Maul and Locke are now closer to part 3 than Discovery.
Right, because Discovery was stuck in their thing for 6 hours.
Right. But if they were stuck in there longer, it was over. So now they still have a chance.
Right.
But getting back to your point, they are not official. They don't have we don't know that they have it yet. That's the next episode, which neither of us has seen yet. So we don't know.
I'm going to watch it tonight.
It's called Mirrors. It's the one we've been assuming is in the Mirror Universe, which is possibly why their ship at the end, they're like, we know their ship was here, but it's gone. So they went somewhere else.
Right. And it left there's no trace of it.
Yeah. So, another dimension. And then we start the time jumping through the spider to all sorts of different times.
Yeah, that was a rollicking good time, I thought. And they built it up. I thought the pacing of it was really nice. They built it up bit by bit. Certain ones were longer, certain ones were shorter, some were more dramatic. Raynor is so, it's so smart to have a character there who didn't live through it, because then it doesn't feel like exposition when he says, "What's going on?" Well, this was the time. Right. Well, I love when he says something like, "What is that red thing?" And I'm thinking, that's what we all thought for a whole season.
I mean, they are kind of recognizing there is a ridiculousness of this show, like when she says to him, that's because Stamets has tardigrade DNA. And he's like, what? And she's like, nah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, he says he lives outside of time because of his tardigrade DNA. And Raynor goes, like he makes this little sound, which is great.
Now, of course, as first officer in the previous episode, we were led to believe that he has studied everyone's record. So he should know this, but we're just going to pretend that he skipped that part of Stamets's. Anyway, doesn't matter. Because it was a fun moment.
Yes.
I mean, there were lots of this episode had tons of fun moments. I think, my favorite is probably Linus. So they were season one. So we're now season 1 Discovery Linus,
who doesn't really notice that her uniform is different.
Linus just loves the color red on her.
Yes.
Who knew Linus had such an eye for fashion?
Right.
That was a lot of fun. Although the thing with the red uniform, okay, so at one point they jump back in time. I think it was their second jump, where they jump back to when the ship was being built, which was the earliest jump they ever did. Right. So we knew the ship was built at the San Francisco Fleet Yard, and they're like, if you're in San Francisco, there's a Golden Gate Bridge. Those are the rules of movie and film. If you're in San Francisco, the bridge.
It's a good rule. It helps everybody.
So there's the guy working there, and they're in these 30 second century outfits. Like, why didn't he go, who the hell are you two, on this highly secure, super double secret spore drive ship? Who are you guys? Instead, he's like, oh my God, there's an inspection. They weren't in Starfleet uniforms.
To be fair, he could have not known about spore drive secret stuff, and he was just working on like the regular part of the ship. Like, I could maybe make a convincing argument for that, but why he wouldn't say like, who are you? Because you're wearing uniforms that are not Starfleet uniforms.
I thought that this was the future, when the ship was in San Francisco as like a museum for a little while or something, in like a couple of years in the future, parked in San Francisco for some reason. Because the way he recognized them, I thought, oh, they're, senior officers. I know who they are, and we're in San Francisco, so it's probably the future. But no, it was the past. It's a nitpick.
Right, but the nitpick is they're wearing uniforms that are not, at that time, Starfleet uniforms, and that guy should have been concerned about it.
So back in first season, Michael, very early on when she's on the ship, mutineer Michael, essentially, or specialist Michael, she didn't recognize the uniform, but recognized that it was a captain's uniform.
Yes, which I find very difficult for all of us viewers to realize what everybody's rank is with these uniforms.
Well, she counted the pips, she said. Fair enough, even if it was a different design. And so maybe that is what
Linus and the construction guy all just assumed it was some variation they had not seen yet.
Right. Like he was just playing along. Like, I haven't seen that one before, but I could count the pips. So maybe that explains it, which is, fair enough.
I think this is easily explained, but I did think it was interesting that Raynor and Burnham are always in their future uniforms. But Stamets his brain is outside of time, but he's still being set back in exactly those places because he wasn't in the transporter with them. So that's why he's in his old uniform. He's going into a coma, and there's only one of him.
Yeah. So his consciousness it's a little confusing, but yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. That's what I kind of worked out. Cause why is he still, because he's still he's just the older Stamets with the knowledge of current Stamets.
Right.
Which is a nice throwback to the episode where Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. Is that what it was called? Yeah. So that fantastic episode, because he had to convince Burnham. And so they have a little bond of doing something sort of around a time loop. Theirs was a loop. But I thought it was like a nice, quiet little throwback to that in a way, because they experienced it together. I like that they built in the emotional stakes each time too. Like that scene where she has to go to her quarters and Book is there. Like first we see Grudge. So we know, oh, she's living with Book because Grudge is there.
This is season 4, Michael.
It tells us this is about to happen. And then it does. And then she did this so well. This is when I love Sonequa, because when they don't make her overdo it, and you can just, and I mean, when I say they make her overdo it, I mean add lines to explain every single thing that's happening, which they didn't do. And you can just see in her eyes that she's like nostalgic for the time they were together, sort of has a moment of, I guess I'll just enjoy this one moment of us still being in an uncomplicated relationship where he's just so supportive and hot.
Well, it starts kind of funny, right? Because she's, he walks in and he takes his shirt off and it's kind of awkward,
No, it's not.
And, well, you can tell she's like,
she's
I gotta get,
like, hey, oh my God, I'm distracted by this gorgeous man.
And she's like, I've got 4.5 minutes. And he's like, that's rather specific. So, so no, I thought it was funny. And then it turns into that thing. And she just kind of goes with it, It's
like sad for her at the same time. Because he's saying everything he's saying, and I feel like you can see her thought process, her character's thought process.
When he says, I love you, and she says it back, the question is she regretting breaking up with him? Is this part of, because eventually they're probably, we've got 6 more episodes, but they're probably going to get back together, right?
They'd better. Yeah.
So this could be the turning point where she's like, you know what? Maybe I do miss this guy and his abs.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's a turning point. But I just really felt the complexity of her emotions as she looks at him and is feeling all these conflicting things. And that to me is what I loved about season 1, Michael Burnham. And she recreates it, is that she was so staid and stoic because she was always trying not to show her emotions because she had that Vulcan training, but you could tell that there was so much going on and that she was holding everything back. And I feel like she recalled all of that in that great scene.
Well, we got to see her play season 1, Michael, as well.
Yeah.
In a few scenes. And yeah, it really brought it home how different it was. She was good at bringing that back.
Yeah.
And I know you talked to her about how she researched, she had to kind of go back to old scripts and, watch some old stuff to kind of get back in that mindset.
Yeah, she said she told me that she watched some old shows, looked at scripts, and she has a journal she keeps, she said, as a character, and she went back, like a stream of consciousness journal, and she went and looked at all of that too to get back into that mindset, she said.
I thought they just nailed the look. I mean, Tilly made a joke about it, oh, I love your hair.
Which is the same thing she said. Do you remember? It's an echo of what she said when they were finally reunited in season 3. Michael had spent a year away, and then she comes back on the ship, and they have this sweet moment until he's like, and I love your hair. So it was the same thing, which is nice.
I forgot that, but that it Tilly was funny. There wasn't enough Tilly in this, but we had plenty of Reno, which we can get into later.
Great Reno stuff.
The pivotal scene in the episode is Michael and Michael together, which again, classic Star Trek. We knew eventually they were going to run into each other.
Yes.
And they had many choices of many different Michaels, but it made sense for them to go as far back as they did to...
They picked the best one, and the moment, like, wasn't that just like Linus got out of the elevator or something? She was like, shoo. And then, boom, this hand comes in. And the first time I watched it, I was like, oh! Like, it was such a great, fantastic way to do it.
It's logistically a difficult thing to do. Didn't you also talk to her about how they kind of pulled it off?
This was at the junket. And so that was one of the things she talked about, was both the emotional part of it and the physical part of it. So let's hear it.
I feel that all of our characters found this stasis. We found this balance, and we sort of did it together. Our journeys were running, parallel while they were intersecting in all these different ways too. But I think physically speaking, we see this liberation happening with Burnham over the course of the series. There's this rigidity in the beginning that mimics the logic, right, and the rationality. But then there's a fluidity that comes over the course of the series, and that mimics her liberation as a person, and finding herself and defining herself for herself, and realizing that she is just as dutiful as she thought she was, but now it's an internal drive and not an external drive. And so I love that we get to see these fighting styles against each other, because it's one of the major reasons why present day Burnham defeats past Burnham, is because now there's a freedom. There's a freedom and there's a security, and you can see it. You can see it in the fight. We wanted to make sure that we did that. I gotta big up Chris McGuire, our stunt coordinator, for doing that, and our director Lee Rose, because it was important for us to showcase that contrast, that growth, that evolution in the fight as well, in the physical performance.
Yeah, I did notice that they had different fighting styles, so that was interesting. That's kind of what they were going for. There was a Kirk Fu move in there, the wall jump. I thought it was fascinating because they were so evenly matched, obviously, because they are the same person. That was seamlessly done, watching them fight together.
Yes. I don't look at those things looking like, where's the stunt person? Where's the stunt person? But I get distracted when it's obvious. And I thought they did a great job playing the emotional as well as the physical stakes.
You think of some of the original series fight scenes.
I know.
Where, especially in HD, where you could see the stunt. It's so obvious the stunt guy is there. And because we were never meant to see it on 4K TVs,
right.
But no, they know they're dealing with 4K TVs, and they've got to make it work, and they did. So hats off to them.
Really well done. And then the Vulcan neck pinch, and then that she says this, as she's sort of letting Michael Burnham down to the floor, and she says, don't give up, and this is what you have to do. I talked to her about what she would tell herself too, because I was thinking it is such an interesting journey for the character as well as the actress. So she had basically, it was almost the same advice.
So they had to do the scene where, because the key was she had to go to the bridge and convince everyone she's from the future, which this is another trope of how do you convince people you're from the future, and stuff about, who they are. And I thought it was a fun scene, but what was after she convinced, the way she convinced them was by convincing Ariam that Ariam would sacrifice themselves. But wouldn't any member of Starfleet sacrifice themselves in a moment of, it's either this, save the ship or sacrifice yourself? It's the only way.
That was the weakest part of the whole episode, because I didn't understand why that was the thing that convinced her, for the same reason. Why was that? Oh, then you must be telling the truth. And they're all like, she would never do that. And it's like, you would all do that. You've all offered to do it. At various times, each person has said, I will sacrifice myself. I will take this risk.
Yeah, she said something like, we would never let her do that. It's like, well, that's the whole point of a sacrifice. There's no other choice. But the next scene, Michael whips out her 32nd century floating hologram tricorder device, and Ariam goes, wow, that's some pretty cool technology. And I'm like, you could have showed her that.
Yes.
That might have sold it, but she held that one back because it's not an emotional truth. There was a red herring, and it could have just been me, but they were in the turbo lift fairly early in the episode when they are just kind of figuring out what's going on. And Rayner says, we better tell the computer not to track your life signs. So can you use your command codes? And I immediately thought, wait, Rayner is the spider. This is all a fake out.
Because every time anyone tells someone to put in their command codes, it's so they can steal them.
Right.
It was because they said command codes that you would think that, but I think the point of that scene was to show they are now a team.
I got that later, but for a little while, I was watching Rainer going, is Rainer the spider? Is something up with him? The other thing that I kept waiting to happen that never happened was for Lorca to show up.
Right. So, and he didn't. And they said he was on a mission with Landry and Saru.
Right.
But so when I talked to her on the red carpet at the premiere a couple weeks ago, I said to her, like I said, we're all waiting for Lorca to show up. And she goes, all right. And then I asked her if there was anyone else that they had considered besides Ariam to bring back from their past.
You know, the thing is, no, because we didn't know it was our last season. So it was just what it was. It was this big, grand, adventurous, fun season with the biggest existential questions there are to ask. And that's what we were focused on, right? I wonder if we were to do it again, if we would be able to do something like that. But yeah, we weren't thinking in that way at the time.
I agree with her. If they had to do it again, and if they knew this was the last season, they would have brought back Lorca. I think that's what she's saying.
Right. And there are other people too. Cornwell, like there are all kinds of people. Ash
Cornwell
Tyler
would
could have
been
shown
great.
up. Cornwell would have been great. Ash Tyler showing up would have been complicated and confusing. So there were a lot of, Lorca, I think, is the number one that certainly the one I was expecting and hoping for the most.
Yeah, I mean, they knew they had to explain why he wasn't there. Because they were in season 1, and you're like, well, Lorca's on the ship. Where's Jason Isaacs? Give us Jason Isaacs. I wanted it, but I'm not walking away from the episode saying it's bad because he's not in it. I mean, we know he desperately wants to do it.
Right.
Although it might not have been enough if there was just one little scene with him. Like if you replaced Ariam with, Lorca, would that have been enough for Jason Isaacs? Because I think he'd want a bit more than that, probably.
Although he might see the fun of doing such a quick little thing, too. There's something to be said for that.
So there's a notable thing in this episode. Doug Jones, he's not credited. So we see Saru, and that footage isn't from the episode when they jumped into the future. But it appears to be just like footage they had lying around. We hear Doug's voice, but that's the same audio from that episode when they jumped to the future. So it appears that Doug Jones did not appear for this episode, especially because he wasn't credited. So I'm not sure why, but it seems... Did you feel like you were missing Saru as you were watching it? Like, why aren't we getting more Saru?
Yeah, I mean, I almost didn't realize it until I was done. But it was like, oh yeah, there's no Saru. And then when you go back and look and you're like, his name isn't in the credits, which is weird. I mean, it is something Discovery's always done. Like when Wilson Cruz wasn't in a bunch of episodes, his name came out of the credits. But when I watch other shows, the main cast is credited in every episode. Like I'm pretty like the old Star Treks. Colomini's name is in every episode of Deep Space Nine, and he wasn't in a whole bunch of them.
Doug wasn't in 2 episodes of season 3, if I remember. Obviously, the first episode because it was just Sonequa, and there was like a random episode when he was off, like taking care of Su'Kal or something.
Right.
But he was in the credits for every episode, as was everybody, and they did kind of make a note of it, of how Saru was off the ship with Lorca. I feel like it's hard to tell if it's a creative choice or not.
Yeah.
Kind of feels like he wasn't available.
Yeah. We'll know more as we move forward.
Another thing I think people are going to really like is the jump forward to... It wasn't a full-on Calypso.
It was a bait and switch Calypso. Because it wasn't Calypso. It was a direct result of them not stopping Maul and Locke.
Right. It's not anything. It's an alternate future. It's not the same as
the Calypso situation. But I've seen, like, people are speculating now, because they're thinking about Calypso, that maybe this dangerous technology is left on Discovery, and that's what Calypso is. It's like they send Discovery off to hide the Progenitor's tech.
But this is saying no matter what, you leave Zora alone, she's going to go a little crazy and start watching musicals.
Yes.
That's just in her future, no matter what happens.
And
any timeline.
Listening to something significant, the future's not ours to see, que sera, sera.
Yeah. She has a thing for Doris Day. But no, it was fun, and Zora was able to help them put the map together, which was very cool. So she was helpful.
Yeah.
But I like how Zora was confused. She's like, is this a dream?
I know.
Very sweet, kind of.
Zora's very interesting. There's so many. I have a lot of Zora questions, too.
I still feel like, I mean, getting back to Stamets, the way he talked a bit more about the progenitor tech and what a game changer it is. And he seems to be profoundly affected by this technology. I feel like they're going somewhere with this. I still think that if anyone ends up having to do a V'ger with the progenitor tech, it's going to be him.
Well, I don't think it'll be him because I don't think I think after everything he's been through with Culber, they know they can't break those two up.
Yeah.
So I think they won't make that choice. But I do think you're right that it is, he says it's bigger than anything he's ever taken on, and he's fretting about it and worried about it and very preoccupied. So I think he's going to realize the ramifications of it. He might be the one who says nobody should have it.
Yeah, maybe it comes down to a situation where you've got Kovic on the bridge and, and they're like, push this button and give us the technology. And Stamets stops them from pushing that button.
Right.
And does something that, maybe gets him thrown into jail or something. So he kind of becomes the book of the season of going against orders for something he believes in.
Right, because I don't think anyone should have this tech.
They've got enough magical tech. Giving them God tech is stupid. From a story point of view, you just can't and now we're all gods, so it just doesn't make anything interesting. It'd be a ship full of Qs, essentially. Let's create a new species this week. Sure.
Let's wipe them out. Okay, who cares? Yeah.
But yeah, there's some big choice in his future, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a small thing, but I did like how Adira came in at the end and said that they blinked and lost 6 hours.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering how they were going to explain what happened during those 6 hours. And so no one on the ship experienced any time.
Right. We saw Michael telling them all about it afterwards.
I was worried because you and I are no fans of Osiris. So when they show up and they're like, this is the Osiris tech, I'm like, oh God.
Please don't bring her back.
Yeah. So it was just rando. What did they call the sold regulators? Right.
And then Jet Reno saves the day.
Calls them bucket heads.
Yep. She was great.
She was very funny. She saw the 32nd century uniform. She's like, I don't recognize you, but she bought it because he was fighting the regulators. So he must have been a good guy. Right.
Right. She just helped out. I loved when she's with Stamets and she's like, are you stuck in a time loop right now, Stamets? And he's like, what? No. What? No.
Why would you say that?
She's like, do you remember the thing that happened 10 minutes ago? Right. Okay.
So this episode, this gets into the weird thing of, does she work for Stamets? Is he chief engineer again? Like, as she was answering to him, and early on in the episode, he calls to Adira to tell them to check the flow of some valve, some very engineering thing, not a very sciencey thing.
Like mechanical thing.
Yeah, something that Reno should be in charge of. So they seem to have basically, it's the conflation of science and engineering that just drives me crazy.
And they're never going to stop, so you just have to deal with it. Also, she calls him Dr. Truffles.
That must be reference to something, but I don't remember what it is.
I don't know what it was. But they're never going to work that out.
No.
That's not. But back to her and Raynor for a second. Like, he liked her. Like, that was, the moment I was complaining that we didn't get enough of them in the previous episode because she said one joke and then that was it. This time, like, she fights. They have this conversation. She gives him something to clean up his blood. And he gives this smile. Like, whoever that person is, I like her.
They bonded over the favorite kind of martinis and everything.
At Red's, she mentioned the name of the bar again.
We saw Bryce, by the way.
Yes. And I went back and looked at season 3, episode 2, just to see, like, where was everybody lying? And they did a very nice job of trying to recreate that moment. And Bryce was exactly slumped over, exactly the right way. But it was nice to have him back.
because he left at the end of season 4, reassigned to a different ship, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Or to do some special project or something. Yeah, I thought it was good that they got those folks back. You know, him and Ariam.
Yeah, him and Ariam are really the only old members of the crew they brought back. Now that because they could have brought back Nilsson and all sorts of people if they wanted to.
I mean, they mentioned Landry and why we didn't see her, but along with Lorca. But there were others that would have been cool.
Yeah, and they used people that have been there the whole time. So Pollard was in sick bay during the battle with Control where they put Stamets into a coma. He's like, that was fun where he's trying to talk to. He's like, I need to save
how much this hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, that was painful but fun. I mean, just all in all, it's new but familiar. It's the sweet spot for the show. So we got another mention of the Breen. So we know that's the Breen. Yeah. We know that at least in one timeline, they sell the technology to the Breen, and the Breen attack the Federation and wipe it out. So they are the big bad of the season in theory.
Well, so here's my question. Are we going to keep only hearing about things they're doing, or at some point are we going to see them doing some things? We've talked about factions, and the Breen have been mentioned in every episode.
Well, they showed us a Breen ship. Hard to see, but it was there. So I'm sure we're going to see the Breen. But you never know. Like last episode, to go to these coordinates, we need to go through Zenkethi space. And I was like, are they going to show us the Zenkethi or not? And they're like, they didn't even mention them. They're like, no problem. We're now at the coordinates. So they cut through the Zenkethi red tape, but we don't get to see the space dinosaurs.
Right.
Or maybe next, because they're still in Zenkethi space as of next episode.
Sure.
Yeah, the next episode, they're going to start right where they are. And essentially, right where they started this episode. They haven't gone anywhere.
Right.
But we think they're going to the Mirror Universe next episode.
Right.
Or so it could be Mirrors and Kethy.
Evil. We won't know. We won't know how to tell.
Indeed.
I mean, my biggest nitpick for this episode is why the transporter didn't catch the thing in Adira's sleeve.
Yeah, that's not a nitpick to me at all. This was a super high tech, what they called a time bug, right? Was it a time bug?
Yeah.
But it had a fancier name, whatever. So it's like, if the thing is out of phase, out of time, it cost them a ton of latinum, black market, super duper tech. And so it can avoid the transporter because it's actually not in our space time or whatever. That's easy to. They don't need to throw technobabble at us for that one.
Fair. Why
it needs to crawl around so obviously when it could also be inside the walls? Why
and
didn't
noisily,
right?
Too.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're not exactly stealthy.
It reminded me of the little bug that Mud had in season 1.
Yeah, that's true.
Stuart. He called it Stuart. I was thinking Mud could also have shown up. That was another one they could have done.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. They could go anywhere and do anything. It is kind of like on later seasons of Voyager, like, here, there's an excuse to bring back Seska or Cass or whatever.
Right. Had Rayner mentioned before that he lost his family?
No, a tiny bit of backstory for Rayner and kind of why he's a hard ass. I guess it's a growth episode for him for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a big one where he really, you can tell he's already learning because even at the beginning when they have their fight before the time jumps begin and he gets out of line and then he stops himself and he's like, oh, that was out of line. So I love this character because he is growing and changing already. He has all the hallmarks of a guy who's just going to be like crusty and difficult. And he's hilariously crusty. But he's also so able to take in new information and process it and change his way of thinking.
He's great for reflecting on the show so the show could comment on itself in a way.
Right. Like when he says, we've gone back in time to when you went forward to the future. That's a little confusing. It's like he's speaking for everybody.
Yeah. Like at the end when he talks about how he had explained to this people, he's from the 32nd century. The time wars are in their past. I think by that time, Starfleet probably has a pretty good understanding of time travel. So all you need to do to save people is there's some time travel weirdness, and everyone's like, oh, okay, we get it. Right. You don't need to.
But they did visit particularly challenging times where there was a good reason for everybody to be all suspicious.
No, but I meant the Discovery crew in the 32nd century after they came back. He acted like it might be difficult to convince the crew. And she's like, no, it's going to be easy. Which it was.
Yeah.
I mean, they are all time travels.
Yeah.
Time and dimension travelers.
Yep. They totally get it. They've all been through it.
It's a Tuesday from their point of view.
If this is Belgium, it must be Tuesday.
So 4 episodes in, almost zero progression on the season plot, and yet I feel like we're still moving forward. That's a successful episode where they didn't really carry the serialized story, and yet I didn't miss it at all.
Right. Well, they didn't carry the serialized mystery, but they did bring in things that have happened in the last few episodes, primarily to do with Rayner.
Right. Like all the stuff, like he was able to convince Reese because he remembered what Reese said in episode 3 about, right. So certainly there, I just meant if all you care about is I want to learn more about the progenitors and how this all ties into the chase, there was none of that. But right. I was fine with that.
Yeah, I thought it was a thoroughly enjoyable episode. I think every episode this season is very rewatchable and fun. And this was absolutely the most fun ride they've taken us on. It was just, it was a blast. It was a physical. It was emotional. It had adventure. It had resonance. So many good callbacks to Trek tone and Trek lore. Like this, very well done. A+.
Excellent.
All right, let's do our bits of the week. Tony, why don't you start?
I'm going to get a little political again because I like to do that, I guess. It's not that political, but there was a state dinner at the White House.
That's political. Oh, sorry.
And the prime minister, in honor of the prime minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida. They did all the traditional things, including sharing toasts with the president. And the prime minister's toast ended with him talking about Star Trek, which kind of caught everyone off guard. People kind of laughed. But he said, finally, let me conclude with the line from Star Trek, which you all know, to boldly go where no one has gone before. He was talking about Japanese-American cooperation as a final frontier. And then he brought it up again when he did the actual toast. And he also mentioned George Takei and Hikaru Sulu. So I don't know if he's like a super fan or, someone on his writing staff is, but...
somebody is. Yeah, I would think he is if he's going to say that stuff.
Probably. The president got a kick out of it. The room did. It made big news around the world. With headlines of Japanese prime minister, invokes Star Trek. So that's kind of cool. This is only a few weeks after Star Trek showed up at a big NATO event. Star Trek is, playing on the world stage.
Where it should be.
Exactly. What do you got?
Mine is Trek adjacent because I have suddenly become obsessed with the show, The Librarians, which I'd never seen before. So it is like Jonathan Frakes directed 10 episodes of it. He also became a supervising producer like in the second or third season. It stars Rebecca Romaine. And I have to say, like, I always think she's good when I see her in something. Now I am a huge fan of her. She is phenomenal in that role. One of the stars is also Lindy Booth, who played Alora in the Strange New Worlds episode, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. John Larroquette is a regular on it. And of course, he was a Klingon. Dean Devlin is the creator, one of the creators. And of course, his mother was in Wolf in the Fold. Guest stars will pop up. John Delancey turns up. Brent Spiner. I heard his voice and you can't even see him. And then I Googled it and it's like uncredited Brent Spiner. So Renee Bourgeois shows up. John Noble. Lots of people who are guest stars. Mark Altman eventually became a producer and wrote a bunch of episodes. I was just watching an episode today where Noah Wyle quotes The Wrath of Khan, giving it full credit, saying, no, it's from The Wrath of Khan. And it was a Frakes directed episode. So I just think terrific show, really fun to watch. Lots of Star Trek people on it. Go watch it.
Well, for doing Trek adjacent, my favorite show of the week is Fallout, which stars Ella Purnell from Prodigy. And she's amazing, and it may be one of the best adaptations of, in this case, a video game that I've ever seen. If we're just recommending things we're liking that are tangentially related to Star Trek, let's...
Well, mine is packed with Star Trek people, is all I'm saying. I was able to give you, like, a lot of names, and I have more on my list of people who are guest stars and things. So.
The Librarians, good show. Gene Curtin.
Gene Curtin.
Bob Newhart. Yeah, fantastic show. What I like, it's just fun. It's silly. It's tongue in cheek. But it's genre stuff, so, Yeah,
I mean, it's like, it's got a little bit of a Once Upon a Time vibe, but sort of goofier and more tongue-in-cheek, for sure.
Yeah. And on that note, that's it for the week. We're going to hit the halfway point on season 5 of Discovery next Friday.
And we have a special episode coming out next week, which will come up in your feed, and it's with the Pan-Can group, as we call them. So it'll be John Billingsley, Armin Shimmerman, Kitty Swink, Jonathan Frakes, and Juan Carlos Cotto.
That'll be probably out on Monday, just a standalone supplemental episode.
All right. Well, we'll see you then.
Goodbye.